My guest today, a writer who has written about a vampire in the Secret Service, The Search for the Fountain of Youth, a psychic spy named John Smith, and he also is a writer in the comic book series Legacy 24. Christopher Farnsworth, today on the One-on-One Interview. Hey guys, welcome into the One-on-One Interview series. This is where I talk to one of your favorite authors about what he or she is doing in the world of books and publishing and get a little advice from them on how you could possibly do the same. My guest today, the first guest that I invited on the relaunch of the show is my buddy, Christopher Farnsworth. Chris, how are you?
Good. How you doing, Tim?
Hey, good. I appreciate you coming back on. It's been, a couple of years. I had you on the old show. And the response was so good for that show. I thought, who better than to have Chris Farnsworth back on the new show? So welcome in.
Thanks. That was one of my favorite interviews.
Well, appreciate that. Yeah. Hey, well, we got a lot to talk about because you've been a busy guy over the last couple of years. But before we get started, if you will, give the audience a little background on you.
Sure. I was a journalist and a reporter for a long time. Then I managed to sell a script to Hollywood and started writing full-time after that. And then when the WGA writer's strike hit in 2007, I couldn't sell any scripts, but I had an idea that I really loved about a simple idea about a vampire who works for the president, you know, just a simple idea like that. And it was and I got really lucky. I managed to sell it in a 3-book deal. And since then I've been writing novels.
Now, how do you come up with an idea off the top of your head about a vampire who works for the president?
That one was really, I was lucky. I stumbled across this factoid about President Andrew Johnson, who was the president who followed Lincoln. And there was a man who was accused of killing 2 of his crewmates on a whaling vessel and drinking their blood. For some reason, Andrew Johnson pardoned him. And what I thought was, why would the president of the United States pardon a vampire? What would he do with a vampire? And the more I thought about it, I was like, what wouldn't he do with a vampire? So it became for me this idea that transformed into a lone defender against the supernatural, working for the government, sort of mix of James Bond meets Stephen King.
I like that. James Bond meets Stephen King. And that was the Nathaniel Cade series?
Right. That was the Nathaniel Cade series.
Yeah. When did the first book come out?
2010. So yeah, it's been a while now.
Wow. So was it an immediate success? Talk a little bit about the journey, because a lot of the authors that I talk to we're looking for agents. We're trying to get published. What was your journey? You wrote the book, and then how quickly did it come to be?
It took a while. My screen agents didn't really have any contacts with the publishing world because those worlds don't often intersect. Mm-hmm. And so I had to query and cold call a bunch of agents, and one agent in particular was interested, but wasn't sure. He wanted to represent me, but his assistant really loved the book, and she was fantastic. And at the time, I was with my wife, and I had just bought a new house, and I was out of work, and I had and we had a baby on the way, and so I didn't really have time for him to make up his mind. So what I did was I asked the assistant, is there anybody you know who's young and hungry and ready and who would like this right away? And she's told me immediately, Alexandra Machinist. And Alexandra took a look at my book, and I was very lucky to get somebody like her who would champion it. And since then she's gone on to, she was just starting out at the time. Now she's a partner with ICM, and she's a major. She's become this massive literary star.
And she lets everyone know that she's Christopher Farnsworth's agent. That's how she's known.
Yeah, no. I'm now one of the I'm like one of the many people in her bullpen now.
Yeah. Well, it almost sounds like the planets kind of aligned there, because that agent wasn't so hot on the project, but there was someone in the office there that was. Do you send that person a Christmas card every year with a nice check?
I sent her a huge bouquet of flowers when it did sell. And yeah, now I keep in touch, and I tell everybody what a magnificent person she is all the time.
That's awesome.
But what you're saying about the stars aligning, though, I mean, this, I think, actually is something that would be useful for your audience, is that instead of you have to do a lot of waiting, and you have to be really patient, but it doesn't hurt to ask, is there anybody else? Is there anybody else who would really enjoy this? Anybody else you can recommend? Because I've been waiting for a long time. And if it's easier to get published now than it is to get an agent.
Yeah, it is. What do you say to those folks that say, well, I really don't want to bother anyone? Do you ever run across those passive authors, Christopher?
I am one of those. I am one of those all the time.
Yeah.
I had a bunch of meetings a couple weeks ago, and each one of the people in it said, God, you're almost British. You're so reserved. You're just don't bug anybody, and you have to bother people. Mm-hmm. And they will tell you when they don't want to hear from you anymore. And that's up to them.
Well, I'm a big believer in the old adage, if you don't toot your own horn, no one will. And I see that a lot. And by the way, Christopher Farnsworth sounds very British.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. I'm not sure that was a compliment, but that's okay.
I would love to be British. I think that first of all, they've got James Bond, which is fantastic.
That's true.
They have that incredibly cool accent. Everything sounds good in a British accent.
Even when they're telling you the worst news on the planet.
Oh yeah.
I'm sorry, we have no rooms. I'm sorry.
Right. Or yes, the entire eastern seaboard collapsed into the Atlantic Ocean today. Supervillain has assumed control of the rest of the United States. Film at 11. You
sound a lot like a BBC anchor when you do that. So.
That's why you go to the BBC for the bad news.
Exactly. So the first Cade book hit. Now, at the time, what led you to that genre? Because that's also one of the things that I hear a lot is, which genre should I write? It's kind of the old thing, Chris, where people will go on Amazon or they'll go to the bookstore and they'll look for what's hot. For a while, everybody was writing Harry Potter books. Now everybody's writing Game of Thrones. Everyone's writing True Blood. What really attracted you to that genre? And I know your character was different because nobody was doing vampire, Secret Service guys. But what really attracted you to that genre in the first place?
What I was really reluctant to write about vampires because I've read almost every vampire book there is, starting with Dracula, but I never liked vampires. As a kid, they freaked me out. The idea of a predator being somehow attractive or sexy,
right,
was really sort of repugnant to me. And I understand there's a whole part of the mythos that it depends on that. But to me, the predator side of it was always the more interesting, the more fascinating, but also the more repellent part of it.
Yeah.
But what really attracted me to it was this was such a great little anecdote. This was such a great little leaping off part, and I couldn't get it out of my head. I just kept thinking, what if all the horror movies were real? What if the world were filled with all these dark things, and we just get sort of through our popular culture, the truth filtered in a way that we can handle? Mm-hmm. So I decided I would try to make vampires scary and not sexy, and that challenge is what was the most interesting part of it for me.
But you also you set those books at in a time and place when most vampire books did not take place. I know it's a vampire mystery James Bond type thing, but there's a lot of historical things in your books because they were set. Who was the president that he became out to serve?
Andrew Johnson was.
Andrew Johnson, right. So that was what, mid to late 1800s. So was it the fact that that little tidbit that you saw took place during that time period? Is that really what made you stay in that time period?
For me, it was a chance to use everything I'd learned as a history major in college, because you don't often actually get to do that.
Right.
I really wanted to do a historical novel. I wanted to do a spy novel. I wanted to do a monster novel. Mm-hmm. I wanted to combine everything I learned, in all the creature features I watched as a kid, with everything I learned in college about history. And, it was also, I was also trying to combine the war on terror in a way that made sense to me, in a framework that I could, I really wanted somebody to bite back at all the.
Yeah. So when that book was written, I think you said it was a 3-book deal. Did you have the other 2 books already mapped out?
Pretty much. Yeah. Yeah. That was, I had an idea that this was the direction it was going to go. And I was told, by my agent, plan for as many of these as you possibly can, because that's what the publishers.
Yeah. Do you think authors that do focus on a series like that have a better shot at long-term success than just the one-offs?
I think you should always be planning to keep publishers like series, because it gets people invested and it gets people going forward. I think you should always plan that if your first book or your idea has legs and can run for a while, then see how far you can take it. Because that's a question that's going to come up. They will ask, do you see this as a franchise? Do you see this as a series? Where does it go from here? Right.
And what have there been 3 books in that series now?
Yeah, 3 books and a couple of novellas.
Talk a little bit about the evolution of Nathaniel Cade over that series.
So Nathaniel Cade starts just as a secret agent for the president, and he has a sidekick, a human handler named Zach Barrows. And I started the series at Putnam, G.P. Putnam's Sons. But then I switched publishers to William Morrow. And so the series couldn't really go with me. So since then, I've written a couple of novellas that sort of continue the Cade series on my own.
Right. When he started out, I know he was a vampire, but talk a little bit about his temperament. Was he the evil vampire? Was he one of those vampires that just, thirsted for blood just as sustenance, or what was his temperament when you first started the books?
Well, the idea I always had about Cade is that he views himself as an abomination. He views himself. He was raised Calvinist, which is very, very Puritan strain of Christianity, and so he views himself as a monster. And it's his own sense of internal controls that keep him from going off the rails and drinking the blood of everybody around him. So he wears a cross around his neck in the first books, and uses the pain to focus to keep him away from his bloodlust. He drinks animal blood, not human, even though it's like putting kerosene into a Ferrari Testarossa. He can't actually run on that very long, but for him, it's a better alternative.
Right. Talk about the versatility that you had to bring to that character, because you see so many of these vampire books where they are romanticized. It's all seduction and sex and, every vampire. If you look at the True Blood series, especially like the TV show, gosh, those are some pretty people, Chris. You just want to let them suck on your neck. But,
it barely even seems like a downside with True Blood or with Twilight. It's like, what's so monstrous about this? And
Live forever, stay up, party till the sun comes up. But right, but Nathaniel Cade was different though. He was a very flawed character, and he had a lot of internal dialogue going on that drove the things he did.
That was the idea. I wanted to bring back some kind of and I love Charlaine Harris's books. I loved True Blood, the series. There's absolutely and obviously it speaks to a lot of people. But for me, vampires were much more like Kurt Barlow in Salem's Lot, Stephen King's Salem's Lot. They're scary. They're corpses held together, reanimated corpses held together by other people's blood.
Yeah, that was one ugly vampire. Yeah. There was no redeeming values to that guy in Salem's Lot. So was there, or is there any talk or any thought about taking Cade and bringing him to the big screen or to TV?
He's been optioned for film and TV, but Hollywood is
slow, huh?
It takes forever until it doesn't anymore.
Well, in the meantime, you just say, well, I have a deal. And you hope the deal comes to fruition. It's really funny. I talk to a lot of authors who are in the same boat, who have had a property optioned, and they're like, okay, I'm back to waiting. It's just like, when I was sending off queries to agents. So after the Nathaniel Cade series, what came next for you?
After Nathaniel Cade, I wrote a book called The Eternal World, where I worked with a couple of movie producers who had an idea, but they kept running into the same roadblock, which was that studios wanted to see this fleshed out. They wanted to see a book or a graphic novel. And so essentially they hired me to come up with the mythology behind their idea and the story that would surround it. And I also got to pitch it as a novel to my publisher.
And that was about the Fountain of Youth, right?
Yeah, it was a book called The Eternal World. And it was about the Fountain of Youth and these Spanish conquistadors in the 1500s discover the fountain of youth in Florida and drink it and become eternally young. But they also slaughter the Native American tribe that's guarding the fountain of youth and trying to keep it away from people like themselves. And so the daughter of the chief of that tribe spends the next 500 years tracking them down and attempting to kill them.
So this was a heroine rather than a hero.
Yeah. And what happens is in the 21st century, they have run out of the water that's keeping them alive. So they hire a brilliant young biochemist to attempt to replicate it. And what he doesn't realize is that his brilliant, beautiful new girlfriend is also this woman who has been tracking the conquistadors for hundreds of years. Gotcha.
How is it difficult, or how difficult is it rather for you to switch gears and write for a female rather than a male lead?
With Shako, who was the heroine of The Eternal World, it wasn't actually that difficult. She was a great character, and I don't say that like I invented her. Somebody else came up with her basic personality, and for me, it was a lot of fun to just run with it. She's you have to have a certain amount of integrity to be able to maintain your discipline over literally centuries. Mm-hmm. And she is incredibly focused and incredibly driven and incredibly smart. For me, it was a lot of fun to show her supposed primitive actually being smarter and more together and more moral and more advanced than the conquistadors she was dealing with.
Right. When you're developing your books, how deeply do you go into character profiles? Do you go really in depth and look at every possible detail that could come into the story, or are you more of a high level guy?
It depends. I try to actually, even in like ancillary characters, even in people who are going to end up dead in 5 or 6 pages, I try to go into their history, into their past, because I think everybody on the page more or less deserves some kind of story. Everybody you meet in the world has a story behind them. And it's fun for me to imagine those things. I'm not sure I agree with that old saying that everybody's got a novel in their lives, but everybody's got at least.
Yeah. I believe that everybody has a really shitty novel somewhere in there. And that's as nice as I can be about it, because that's what I think. So after The Eternal World, what was was KILLFILE the next, or what did you do next?
This was my character that I got to create, a guy named John Smith, who's actually psychic and born with the ability to read minds. And after struggling with this his whole life, he goes into the army, which discovers his gift and turns him into a special operative. And then after, being essentially a psychic spy for several years, he decides he's had enough of being a weapon and goes off and works on his own as a fixer for the 1%, a guy who decides, I'm going to make my own money and get away from everybody else so I can finally be rid of all this echoing noise inside my head.
Right.
I can shut off his ability.
It's one of the things I like about your books is you take a premise that may or may not have been done before to some degree, and you really tweak it and make it unique and your own. A lot of Dean Koontz is an author that I'm a big fan of, and he had that ability. He would take something, like a psychic, and rather than have him go by lottery numbers or that sort of thing, and you do that as well. Talk a little bit about how do you come up with those kind of, not just the characters but the abilities they have and how far they take them. And I assume that every one of your characters, well, I know they do, they have a moral compass in there somewhere that they have to deal with as well as their ability, right?
Right. Well, thank you. That's really kind. I mean, good. How you doing, Tim? Well, as he really drills down into the actual implications. It's not just a gimmick. And I think, I just think a lot too much about things like psychic abilities and vampires. I think I spend way too much time thinking, like, what would that really be like? And if you really stop to think about being able to hear other people's thoughts, it would be awful.
It'd be maddening, wouldn't it?
It would be like having Twitter and Facebook going through both ears while you're also listening to talk radio all the time. Mm-hmm. Plus, you also get everyone's aches and pains and complaints. It's forced empathy. And sometimes the only thing that keeps us sane are the boundaries between us and other people.
Right. Now, the John Smith books, Flashmob especially, that is more modern day.
Right. Yeah, KILLFILE takes place about, a year ago when it came out, and Flashmob takes place just before, in 2016. So
how much do you include the technology and things that are going on in the real world in your books?
Well, I was a tech reporter for a long time, so right. Technology still fascinates me. And in KILLFILE and Flashmob both, the only weakness, aside from John Smith's ability, his superpowers are his kryptonite. His weakness is also his strength. He can hurt people with his thoughts. He can give them bad memories, bad dreams, the same pain that he's experienced as a soldier and as a spy, or in those torture rooms in Abu Ghraib or Bagram. He can carry all that with him, and it still tortures him, but he can also implant it in other people. And so that's his weapon, but it's also his kryptonite. He also feels that pain again.
Right.
So the only other weakness he has aside from that is that he can't read anything. He can't read thoughts over electronics. Like this conversation you and I here are having is a normal conversation to us. To him, it would be bliss because there's no psychic chatter.
Right. Yeah. It seems like a common theme or a common occurrence in your characters is they do have these, call them special gifts, special powers, what have you, but those are also, that's also their curse. Exactly. The talent to read minds is, that would drive me completely crazy, listening to everybody talk about how handsome I was. Yeah.
How could you maintain your humility in the face of all those compliments all the time?
Exactly. I would be like a Kardashian or something. It would be horrific. So let's talk a little bit about KILLFILE, which is the new book. Is that just out?
Right. Flashmob is the one that's just out.
Okay. And I'm sorry. Flashmob. KILLFILE was last year.
Right. But anyway, this is all a long way of saying that technology is the only real Achilles heel that he has. Mm-hmm. And so in KILLFILE, the villain, the bad guy, is a data miner and is able to essentially do the same thing Smith does electronically. He can gather information about anybody and use it as a weapon. He can make it so that you've never made a mortgage payment and you lose your house. He can make it so that every surveillance camera in the country follows you. He knows everything about you. He's omnipresent. And there's nothing you can do to stop him. He's in everything.
But that's really not fiction.
Exactly.
Yeah, that could happen now.
We're currently living with it. Yeah. And in Flashmob, the bad guy has figured out a way to weaponize social media. He can turn people into these sort of ravaging flash mobs, these hate mobs against anyone.
Right.
By basically applying an algorithm to them.
Yeah. Again, not far-fetched at all.
It's already happening. You look at Pizzagate. You look at the guy who decides, based on nothing more than complete falsehoods, complete conspiracy theories on the internet, that he believes there's this horrific thing going on in this pizza parlor outside Washington D.C. So he shows up there with an assault rifle.
Right.
Or you look at the guy who opened fire on the congressional baseball game on the practice because he had just gotten so worked up. And these are people who are unbalanced to begin with, but there is this pressure being that they feel now, because social media has plugged so completely into our brains.
Right. Do you think that social media has really, it's almost like it's giving birth to a completely different kind of, I don't want to say nut job, but criminal. It is now such an easy avenue. You can go on with one tweet and have thousands, if not tens of thousands of people in the street just going berserk. So, are you like me? Do you often wake up and question whether or not the internet is what's going to bring us down eventually?
It's right now, it's our nervous system. And the first thing the nervous system tells you at any time is pain. Like when you're a baby, it tells you don't touch the stove, it's hot.
Right.
Or, when you fall down, the first thing you feel is pain.
Yeah.
Eventually I believe we will get to the point where it does what our higher nervous system does, which is communicate, which tells us. Yeah. But right now, we're just suddenly dealing with signals from all over the world. Yeah. And there's so much free-floating outrage. There's so much anxiety, so much fear that people need targets. Yeah. And so that's what they do. They they spend all of their outrage on these things that are small enough to still control and handle. Like, most of us are not in the position where we can do anything about healthcare or the opioid crisis.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these are massive problems. Most of us can't do anything about the wars in the Middle East. But, if somebody says something just stupid on Twitter, well, it takes another 20 seconds to say something stupid.
Yeah. Do you remember a time in our history when everyone was so damn sensitive?
I think we've always been this sensitive, honestly.
Yeah. Is the internet just our new avenue of sensitivity?
Like I said, we're just expressing it for the first time. I remember, when I was a kid, pre-internet, there were like people would communicate in obscene bumper stickers.
T-shirts, man.
No, but they were still the same sort of, I've got mine, screw you, don't bother me. This is me being who I am.
Right.
There's a level, empathy is one of the hardest things to master. And unfortunately, we're being taught empathy the hard way right now.
Yeah. I never got any flack for my Keep on Truckin' t-shirt.
Well, yeah, because who can object to that, honestly?
Exactly.
That's why writers are so vital right now. Because the one thing that you and I can do, the one thing that all writers are supposed to be good at is empathy. We're supposed to be able to put ourselves in the shoes of other people. And, hopefully that practice will make us better at it in the long run and help us teach other people to do it too. That's the great fiction.
And the bottom line is, what a great time to be a writer, because boy, the world is just full of ideas.
And fantastic stories out there.
Yeah.
Like I said once, the world is becoming Pulp Fiction. The world is this massive action movie. Or another way I put it was, it's a script by Harlan Ellison filmed by Michael Bay right now.
Oh, I love that. With Elmore Leonard sitting over there smoking a cigarette, watching it all go by.
He's doing the script. Yeah, he's doing the dialogue.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, we've talked about your books. Let's talk a little bit about your process, because by and large, the folks who do watch this show, again, they are writers. They're trying to get a book either written or published. Talk a little bit about your process. Are you a writer who works on a schedule? Do you do it by the word count? What's a normal day for you like?
I try to make a regular schedule. I try to, I started as a reporter. It's, I try to treat it like a 9-to-5 job. Mm-hmm. You can't wait for inspiration when you're on deadline on a daily or weekly basis as well. You've still got to hit your targets. So every day I try to write. That doesn't mean it always happens. Mm-hmm. I know that there are writers out there who are way more prolific than I am. My friend Beatrice Williams writes at least 2 books a year. Jonathan Mayberry writes, 40. I'm always in awe of that guy. He's
crazy. Yeah.
He's a machine. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Ian Tregillis, another writer I know, writes, he's literally a nuclear physicist and he writes novels. So I'm in awe of those guys. But I try to get, words on the page every day. Some days it's 250. I shoot for 2,500. The best day I've ever had is I've done like a 20,000 word day once.
Wow. The kids must have been away.
That was me just, locked in a room, typing away madly on deadline.
Yeah. I think my biggest day I did about 14,000 words. And then when I went back and read them, they weren't all great words.
Sometimes they're not all in order.
Yeah. That was also my biggest editing day. So, when you are writing, do you have to seal everything off? For example, when I get in the zone, I have to close the door, turn on social media. We were talking about a minute ago. It's kind of a gnat in my ear because I've got so much going on. I have to really just turn everything off and just have that Word file open, or I'm gone. So what do you do?
I do recommend, shutting down your internet connection if you can, or at least turning off Chrome, turn off Facebook, turn off Twitter. I used to have an office I would go to every day. Now I have a desk at a place where a bunch of writers gather. It's dead silence. There's just a little Zen fountain trickling in the background. It's cool. Fantastic. The only thing you hear is other people tapping away on their keyboards. And after years of newsrooms where, people were yelling or phones are ringing, that's really nice.
Yeah. Well, writing is really a lonely business.
It is. It is.
Yeah. So I think it's good to get out. I was watching a program this morning. It was a new entrepreneurial space here, and it's kind of like if you're a one man or a one woman shop, you can come and just hang out and share space. And they were talking about the benefit of the network and the socializing and the camaraderie. And I know there are days when I literally do not leave. You know, my office is in my house. I don't even leave the house.
Right.
And when you start asking the dog about character development, you know, it's time to do something. One other thing I wanted to talk to you about from a creative standpoint is your work in comic books. You are writing the 24 Legacy series. Let's talk about that. I'm always fascinated about comic books.
Right. I'm a huge comic book geek.
I'm sorry, graphic novel?
Graphic, yes. Aficionado of graphic novels.
Right.
Yeah. I'm a fanboy from way back. I mean, I learned to read from comics. And so I've been bugging my friends at IDW who hold the license for the 24 spinoff from the TV show. And I've been begging them to write a comic forever. And finally they took pity on me. And they said, you know, we've got the license for 24 Legacy. Would you be interested in doing that? And I said, absolutely. So I got to write sort of the origin story of Eric Carter, who's the main character of the new 24 series.
What's that process like? Because, I mean, comic books are by and large dialogue, right?
You have to focus, and you don't have a lot of room for words. You have to really, like you were saying, Elmore Leonard, you have to boil it down. Leave out the parts people are going to skip. So you do some direction for the artists. I was really lucky to have really good artists in Antonio Fuso, who did the pencils and the inks, and Lee Luffridge, who did the colors, and they made it look fantastic.
Yeah.
And they took my ideas and ran with them. And they do the layout, they do all that stuff. It's just this marvelous kinetic action sequences on the page. But the important thing is you have to advance the story in a very controlled way, panel by panel. With much less dialogue than you're used to using. Nobody gets to monologue.
Right. Is that hard for you?
It is a little. I mean, I'm a little bit used to characters sort of stumbling along with their dialogue until they find the nut graph, until they find the most important line. But what I did this time is I would write all that out, and then I would go back and I'd cut out everything that didn't sound like something somebody would actually say.
Right.
And this was a crime story as well as a war story, and people don't have a lot of time to talk when they're being shot at. So I had to eliminate a lot of dialogue. Yeah,
and even though the character development is not seen on the page, you still have to know that character really well.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
And the other thing I noticed about it is instead of a screenplay or a novel where you get to describe the action as it's happening. You're doing a series of freeze frames. So you have to write each panel as if it's one particular still photograph showing the action as it happens.
Yeah. Are you going to do that again?
I sure hope so.
Yeah. A lot of fun. Are your kids impressed by your comic books more than your regular books?
Yeah. I got to go to my daughter's third grade class and show them how to write a comic book, which was probably the highlight of my year.
Look at you. You're daddy of the year when you can do. Nobody cares what I do, but you write a comic book and you're a star with the third grade set there.
They got to make up their own characters. It was great.
Let's talk a little bit about the landscape now as far as publishing in general, because, you know, self-publishing is so prolific now. It's so easy to self-publish, which in my mind is kind of a double-edged sword, because a lot of books are being self-published that maybe should not have seen the light of day. But your thoughts on self-publishing versus or in conjunction with traditional publishing?
Both, yeah. With the Cade stories, because the first three books are still over at Putnam. I do novellas that continue the action and continue the story, because the readers out there who really love Cade still want to see him. So I absolutely think it's a great idea for some things. The novella is not a form that publishers can really profitably publish. So, however, as a Kindle single or a Kindle or a Kindle book, it's fantastic.
Yeah,
and it's exact. So I think the novellas and short stories have seen a real resurgence thanks to e-publishing.
Yeah. Your thoughts on, I hear this from a lot of our authors who are not big fans of Amazon. They're appreciative of the platform itself. Amazon creates space. It gives them an avenue to publish their books. But a lot of authors really feel neglected or even abused at times from Amazon. What are your thoughts on that? Is that just a bunch of authors whining, or is Amazon putting more emphasis on the big guys than the small guys?
I can't say that that's been my experience. I've not, I don't do self-publishing full time. And so I don't have the same experience that, say, a Kindle Unlimited author would have.
Right.
Somebody who depends on that solely for their income. I do, I have a traditional publisher, and I do I do my ebook publishing on the side. Mm-hmm. So I would say that I don't have the experience to answer for those people. I would say that my experience has always been it's worked really well.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of times it's the old, you get out of it what you put into it routine. And this is why I coach a number of new authors, and we talk a lot about expectations. And the old days are gone where all you have to do as a writer is write. I mean, those days, and talk a little bit about that, the business of writing. You're doing some self-publishing. How much of the business side of things, i.e. marketing, distribution, all of that stuff, how much of that are you having to do now?
Right. Authors have to do a lot of marketing now. I have a social media presence that I have to maintain every day. I gave away a Kade novella as a bonus for anyone who bought Flashmob. So I'm trying to boost sales in every way I can. It's not like the 60s or 70s, even when you could just write the book and then somebody else would take care of the advertising and marketing. More and more, you have to be the guy out pushing it out there.
Yeah. And who's really having a hard time with that is some of the older authors who have been around for a long time and were used to that old system. And I'm not going to mention any names, but I have two. They've become really good friends of mine, older gentlemen who were best-selling authors in the 60s and 70s and 80s, who really, this whole internet thing just scares the hell out of them. And the thought of having to market their own books is just completely foreign to them. And it's kind of sad, but it's the evolution of the business, right?
Right. The world has changed. The world has changed even from the first ebook authors. You can't just put out an ebook and then expect to make $30,000 a month like some people used to. You have to raise yourself above the crowd.
Yeah.
But I think traditionally published authors who are looking for the days when publishers would take care of everything for you, that doesn't exist anymore. Yeah.
Here's a question that I got in a Facebook group the other day. I do a lot of video now, and I also, I do a series of videos on the art of writing. And someone asked me, did I think that books and writing were just going to go away and be replaced by audio and video? And you can imagine what my answer was to that. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely not. I mean, primarily, first of all, text is much easier. We still have bandwidth issues in some places. But text is an entire, text-based interfacing, whatever you want to call it, is a much more primal and much more direct experience into your imagination.
Yeah.
As long as kids are being taught to read, there's going to be writing.
Well, and there's the scary thing, because you remember back when you and I were kids, remember penmanship? Remember being taught how to write? They don't even do that anymore. They've got typing classes, but you're not going to learn to write it. My youngest daughter, who's 21 and a senior in college, she can still barely script her name, but by God, she can type 125 words a minute.
Right.
So,
right.
But
it's a different skill set. My kids are being taught cursive because there is a brain to body connection that you forge by learning how to make the letters with your hands.
Yeah.
That's absolutely part of learning how to read.
Yeah. It could be just an Alabama thing. because we're always way ahead of the curve, Chris. You know, we're innovators here in the great state. Exactly.
No, I think you're seeing that in a lot of schools. I think that people have been saying for so long, kids have to get computers, they have to get iPads, they have to get laptops.
Right.
That they're forgetting some of the things that bring you to the ability to use.
That's a great point. And that's when here in the schools, I mean, when you start the first grade, you've got an iPad. I mean, they literally give you an iPad, and boy, by the time you're in second grade, you're a whiz on that iPad, but you can't write your name, you know, to save your life. But that's off topic. Couple of minutes here left. Let's talk a little bit about where you see the industry going as a whole. And we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but over the next few years, do you see the publishing industry from authoring, editing, agenting, the whole 9 yards? Do you see any changes coming down the pike?
It's hard for me to say. I'm really good at predicting the present, but I'm not terribly great at actual prognostication into the future. Everything that I see right now looks obvious to me. And it's always a surprise to me that it doesn't look obvious to other people.
Yeah.
I think that you are going to see in publishing, and this I think is just in general, I think you're going to see more use of machine learning and AIs and directed data. I think that the publishing industry has been behind for a long time in figuring out who their audience is.
Yeah.
They've got to change that. I mean, Amazon knows who buys each book and why and what, and they've been drilling down into this data. The publishing industry has to do this.
Yeah, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, if you're giving the reader what they want, that's a pretty good thing.
I think that's a great thing, but I think that we're still going to be surprised by books that come out of nowhere and just sort of explode into the zeitgeist. I don't think anybody knew that Gone Girl was going to be the hit that it was. There's no way you could have come up with that in a marketing campaign, or there will always be, you know, the unique explosions of creativity.
Why do you think books like that really take off?
I think that we're all sniffing the same zeitgeist at one time or another. You know, it's the reason there were 4 or 5, you know, young Greek god ideas running around at the same time that Percy Jackson hit.
Yeah. The
reason that Harry Potter took off. So we've got this innate need for narratives and stories that explain the world to ourselves.
Yeah.
And that show us what we know. Things ring true because we stumble upon those stories.
A lot of it, what is the opportunity is, or no, what is it? Luck is when opportunity and chance come together, or something like that. You know,
it means timing or something. Yeah.
There you go. Your brain is functioning much better than mine. But I think that has a lot of success often relies on that, because I'm sure you and I both know wonderful authors who have never sold a single book. And then we know other authors who have sold lots of books, and we're not, you know, really crazy about their talent. How important is talent? Is it? I know it's important, but is it more important than opportunity and timing and just good old plain luck? No. Talent will get you in the door. Talent will get you started. And after that, you're on your own.
You still have to work. You still have to apply your butt to the chair and write. I firmly believe that. I think talent got me started, but I heard from many people over the course of my life that, you know, you've got to actually write the book. You have to have a product that you can show people. Right. Yep. I mean, I think that has a lot to do with it. To me, it's almost like you can be lucky one time, but to sustain, you've got to have that talent. Exactly. Yeah. And you do, my friend. You're very good for you. Christopher Farnsworth, the author of the new book, Flashmob, before that, KILLFILE. Chris, if they want to find out more about you, where should they go? www.chrisfarnsworth.com is my website, where you can follow me on Twitter at Chris Farnsworth, or on Facebook at author Chris Farnsworth. Very good. And we'll put all those links down below. Really quickly, in about a minute or so, Chris, final advice for those authors out there who want to do what you have done? Just keep writing. Find what you love. Write about it. If other people don't love it, make it better until they do. Excellent advice. Chris, we appreciate it, man. Thanks for coming on. Thank you so much, Tim. You're so kind.